Hello, this is Shinobu Kitayama. I'm this year's president of APS. It's my real great pleasure and honor to give this year's William James Award to Dante Cicchetti. He's a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he's been really active in many areas of research, including adolescent use, alcohol use, and brain development, cross-cultural research, and also he has been making major contributions to the research on mental disorders such as bipolar and schizophrenia. His major research interest lies in the formulation of an integrated developmental theory that can account for both normal and abnormal forms of ontogenesis. His research has several foci. One, a multiple levels of analysis developmental psychopathology perspective. Two, the developmental consequences of child maltreatment. Three, neuroplasticity and sensitive period. Four, the impact of traumatic experiences upon brain development. Five, the biology and psychology of unipolar and bipolar mood disorders. Sixth, the study of attachment relations and representational models of the self and its disorders across the lifespan. Seventh, multi-level perspectives on resilience. Eighth, multi-level evaluation of randomized control trial interventions for depressed and maltreated children and adolescents. And finally, epigenetics. Big congratulations, Dante.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Growing up, my family resided in a large Italian community in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Throughout my entire childhood, I had close friendships with culturally, ethnically, racially, and economically diverse groups. From a very early age, I began to formulate an understanding of how poverty, hardship, mental illness, and malevolent care could exert impacts on children and families. These experiences established the foundation for my developing the passion I have for improving the well-being of those growing up in challenging circumstances. After I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, I entered graduate school at the University of Minnesota, where I pursued a joint doctoral degree in clinical and developmental psychology. It was during my graduate career that I began to formulate my views on a developmental psychopathology perspective. I came to realize that the field needed to be interdisciplinary and to focus on the interplay between normality and psychopathology. My initial vision for the field of developmental psychopathology was for it to become a science that not only bridged fields of study and aided in the discovery of important new truths about the processes underlying adaptation and maladaptation across the life course, but also provided the best means of preventing and ameliorating maladaptive and pathological outcomes. Moreover, I thought the field of developmental psychopathology should continuously seek to reduce the dualisms that exist between empirical research and the clinical study and treatment of childhood and adult high-risk conditions and mental disorders, between the behavioral and biological sciences, and between basic and applied research. To acquire the interdisciplinary breadth I thought was necessary, I took extra coursework in graduate school in basic neuroscience, genetics, and psychophysiology. I was fortunate to be mentored by Paul Meehl in clinical psychology and Alan Srofe in developmental psychology. Temperamentally similar to Meal, I profited greatly from our numerous discussions. My research in graduate school focused on the longitudinal, multi-level, multi-contextual development of infants and children with Down syndrome. Srofe ensured that I learned the various skills necessary to conduct this work. All of my mentors were extremely supportive, and they not only provided me with a stimulating and exciting intellectual climate in which they encouraged my freedom to be creative and develop my own ideas, but also gave me great emotional support. Several other individuals were influential in my development as a scholar. These include Norman Garmezy, who inspired me to examine the processes by which individuals who were experiencing significant adversity developed competently. Irv Gottesman, with whom I studied genetics and its role in the development of various psychopathological disorders. Byron Egeland, with whom I first began my research and writing on child maltreatment. Donald Cohen, the legendary former director of the Yale Child Study Center, with whom I edited 2 volumes of developmental psychopathology. Bill Charlesworth, and my very dear friend David Buss, who taught me the importance of an evolutionary perspective. Michael Rudder, who has been a constant source of inspiration to me, and Jerry Kagan, my Harvard colleague. This background resulted in me attaining my first job right out of graduate school, an assistant professor faculty appointment at Harvard University. Harvard was the perfect setting for me. The fact that this was a time-limited, non-tenurable position freed me to embark on projects that most tenure-track assistant professors in search of job security would not have undertaken. Shortly after arriving at Harvard, my colleague Ross Risley and I received a federal grant to initiate work on the etiology, intergenerational transmission, and sequelae of child maltreatment. We were aided by the bright and energetic Larry Aber and by the wise advice and counsel of my career-long supporter, Ed Ziegler. We then initiated the Harvard Child Maltreatment Project. In addition, I devoted my attention to a number of other projects. These included theoretical and empirical work on the relation between affect and cognition in typical and atypical development with my student Petra Hesse. Theoretical writings on childhood depression with my student Karen Schneider-Rosen, and research on symbolic and language development in children with Down syndrome with Marjorie Beagley. I also edited a special issue of Child Development on developmental psychopathology in 1984 that for many in the field marks the modern day emergence of the discipline. In 1985, 2 years after being named the Norman Tishman Associate Professor of Psychology at Harvard, I assumed the position of director at Mount Hope Family Center at the University of Rochester. Although I had conducted research with high-risk children and families with Professor Ping Sarafika since I was an undergraduate at Pitt, I wanted to fulfill the dream I had since I was 19 years old, namely to develop an interdisciplinary center that integrated basic and applied research, prevention and intervention, education, child advocacy, and social policy. At Mount Hope Family Center, which I directed for over 20 years, much progress was made in crystallizing the emergence of the field of developmental psychopathology. At Mount Hope, I became the founding editor of the journal Development and Psychopathology in 1988. I have continued in that capacity to the present day. Special thanks are due to my assistants over the years, Kim Benedus, Jean Cowan, and Carlin Wegman. I continue to conduct research on child maltreatment and on mood disorders in collaboration with my colleagues Liz Hanley, Jungmin Kim Spoon, Michael Lynch, Jody Todd Manley, Asaf Oshri, Fred Rogosh, and Sherry Toth. Moreover, with Sherry Toth, Jody Manley, and Fred Rogosh, 2 randomized control trial interventions with mothers with depressive disorder and their infants and toddlers, and 4 with maltreated infants and toddlers were completed. My research on resilience from a multiple levels of analysis perspective also was launched. It was at Mount Hope that I also began to examine the impact that child maltreatment has on brain development and functioning, and to investigate whether behavior and physiology could be modified by psychosocial interventions. All of this work reflects my long-standing interest in neural and behavioral plasticity. One of the mechanisms through which individuals might be able to acquire resilient functioning happens on a neurobiological level through the process of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity can be framed as a process by which experience results in the reorganization of neural pathways across the course of development. Thus, experience can result in physiological and structural changes in the brain. Neuroplasticity should be conceptualized as a process that encompasses the dynamic and continuous relationship, the brain and the environment that changes over time. In my last years at Mount Hope, I established 2 centers, one for developmental neuroscience and the other for molecular genetics research. Since my return to the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota in 2005, I focused on research on molecular genetics. I've written papers on gene-environment interaction and begun research on the effects of child maltreatment on gene expression. In collaboration with my colleague, Melissa Koenig, and Fred Rogosh, we have examined the multi-level development of selective trust in maltreated preschoolers. I've continued to work closely with my colleagues at Mount Hope Family Center on research investigating stress neurobiology and resilient functioning, as well as genetic contributors to resilience. Exciting new research with my Institute of Child Development colleagues, Katie Thomas, Lauren Diemers, and others, has focused on the neuroimaging correlates of resilience. Sherry Toth, Liz Hanley, Jody Todd Manley, and I have conducted research on the genetic moderation of large-scale interventions for depressed adolescents. Epigenetic studies of the multi-level effects of maltreatment and of maternal depression on DNA methylation have been completed. Being chosen as a recipient of the William James Fellow Award is certainly one of the high points of my academic life. I'm humbled by this honor, which would not have been possible without the support of myriad individuals in my life. I especially want to single out my maternal grandmother, my sisters Gina and Candace, Sherry Toth, who is the current director of Mount Hope Family Center, and Fred Rogosh. I also want to thank Marian Gershell, for her support, friendship, inspiration, and loyalty. Finally, I'm also indebted to the many colleagues and students with whom I have had the good fortune to work with over the past decades at Harvard, at the University of Rochester, especially Emory Cowan and Patrick Davies, and at Minnesota. I've always greatly valued the mentoring process. Both Paul Meehl and Ed Ziegler told me that the most important part of their legacy was the accomplishments of the students they mentored. In fact, Ed Ziegler coined the concept mentor for life because he believed that once you were his student, no matter where you were beyond graduate school, he was in your corner as your mentor for life. I've tried to adopt that in my own mentoring of my graduate students. I've been blessed with having such high integrity and extremely talented graduate students, a number of whom have already attained eminence in the field. Thank you.